right, Joe. Welcome to the show. Delighted to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
It is. It is a pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, but this will be awesome. Um, Tell me. I always like to start the podcast. Kind of diving in from somebody's background and what they're up to. So, like, do you want to give us some color into like who you are? What you do, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, well, I kind of refer to myself as a hospitality brat, being born and raised into
Nice.
this industry here. Kind of following my father's footsteps through his career, and we either always lived in a hotel or near the hotel that he was working at. So for me, it was, a pretty good transition, or I knew at a young age kind of the industry that I wanted to get into. Started working in hotels as a young kid. Went to college at Florida International University. Got my bachelor's degree in hospitality management. Coming out of college, I was recruited by Hyatt Resorts and Hotels, and they placed me in a management training program in Chicago at the Hyatt O'Hare. And from there, I was able to kind of get my feet wet and learn different departments and kind of get some great experience that would kind of move me into my next role, which ended up being actually with Hilton Hotels at the Hilton Chicago, right there on Michigan Avenue.
I've been there. I've been
Have
there.
you? Yeah, it's
I
it's an
have.
amazing facility, and it's been featured in many motion pictures as, the one that comes to mind right
Pictures.
away, The Fugitive with Harrison Ford.
Great movie. Why don't people talk about that film anymore? I'm like,
Right?
yeah,
Yeah,
great movie.
yeah.
The man with
That
the
that
missing
scene.
arm.
Yes, exactly. That scene at the end when they kind of get into a scuffle in the ballroom. That
Yeah,
was
yeah,
at the
yeah.
Hilton Chicago, and then the fight scene at the very end. That was actually filmed in the Conrad Hilton Suite on the top floor of the hotel.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to even rewatch this now. I'm sure I'll pay on Amazon Prime to find it. I'm sure.
There you go. There you
Yeah.
go. Another Hollywood tidbit was Home Alone 2 was also filmed at that hotel. The Christmas scene at the end when all the family gets back together
Not the
was filmed.
Plaza in New York.
No,
Interesting.
that was the first one. The second one. The
The second
second
one
movie.
was in New York, wasn't it? But like, you mean it was filmed pretending to be the hotel?
Yeah, it was at the Conrad Hilton Suite. Yep.
Okay, nice. Well, it was a pretty cool room, I have to say. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, indeed.
nice.
Yeah, so spent 10 years within that building there and kind of worked my way up to an executive committee level position, and with the understanding that if I wanted to continue to progress my career, I needed to find um, another role, but I needed to move out, right? I mean, 10 years in one hotel is a long time.
Yeah.
Not a long time for that building because there have been people there that have been there 30, 40 years. So 10 years in that facility was a drop in the bucket compared to many. But knowing that to move my career up, I needed to move out. I found an opportunity still within the Hilton world, and it moved me here to Jackson, Wyoming.
That's
Worked Was the general manager of a Homewood Suites for another 10 years. So I spent a total of 20 years with Hilton Hotels, and then I was introduced to my current boss. At the time, we were referred to as In-Group Hospitality, and they were building a Spring Hill Suites right down the road from the hotel that I was currently managing. Just through some casual interactions and some community engagement, we connected. It was a good opportunity for me to be able to transition to a much larger hotel. It also had a food and beverage component to it, more meeting space. It was brand new, so it would also give me the opportunity to get involved on the pre-construction and actually open a hotel for myself. So it was
yeah.
a bucket list item of mine. We got that hotel opened up in May of 2017. December of 2017, that hotel was actually sold to a local group. Worked with them for a short period of time. In the background, In-Group Hospitality and PEG, which is the
Yeah.
company that we work for now, was continuing to grow and develop, and they had purchased a portfolio of hotels. So I got a call back from my former boss and asked if I would be interested in transitioning into my current role, which was the regional director of operations. And it was, for me, it was a very easy decision. It was a role that I
Yeah.
had been trying to get into for many years. It provided me the opportunity to continue to grow my career and allow me to kind of spread my wings within the company and share my understanding and knowledge of our industry with, a variety of different GMs across the country. So moved into my role in August of 2018. At that time, I think it was 6 hotels. Through
Yeah.
attrition and development, that number grew. And it would kind of grow and shrink. But today we land on under my portfolio of 9 open hotels with 4 more that we've got in the development pipeline. So kind of that was a quick, fast rundown of my career and kind of where I started and where I landed, and here we are today.
No, that's awesome. And thank you for sharing it. I always like kind of jumping off from that point because I think it just adds a lot of color to the story. And like you
Yeah.
said, like you're like a hotel brat, like you're a hospitality brat,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
find like everyone I've interviewed on the podcast is kind of grown up or like teenagers first foray into making money, is like in hospitality. So like it's like certainly something I always think about and I love asking people, is like what makes somebody great in hospitality? Like what, like you've kind of been even in your blood, like in like coursing through your veins, So
Mm-hmm.
like what are the things that like when you look at like say like your GMs that report up to you, for example, like what do you in your mind, what makes a great GM?
You have to be very appreciative of people. We're in the industry that is to serve and take care of our guests, right? So it's all about the people. And it's not just the guests that come in and out of our doors, but more importantly, it's the ability to really manage a team, right? And taking care of your employees, because the philosophy of, you take care of your employees, they're going to take care of your guests is reality. So being able to manage people is very important. I find that you have to have a lot of patience, especially
Yep.
these days. We have in many markets can be a very challenged workforce, challenge in the fact that it's difficult to recruit, right? So being able to recruit and retain is extremely important
Yeah.
because as we know that turnover can be very costly.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm over the moon you bring these topics up. But it's true. I mean, like, and one thing I'll say is like you're not alone. Like from restaurant to hotel to everything in between that I've spoken to over the course of this podcast, and just actually just doing my job. It's like, hiring and retention are just the two kind of operationally most serious things I think I hear from everybody, no matter what. I think like,
Mm-hmm.
Your largest line item is your people. And so the question is like recruiting them. So like we'll start at that kind of side of things first, and then we can talk about retention, I guess, as well, which is like you're in a resort town as well. Like Jackson Hole's like a resort town, correct? So like when you're trying to like recruit people, I mean, how big is Jackson Hole? Sorry, I should like in my head, but it's not that big, is it? Like it's not a pool of talent, so to speak.
No,
Just
no,
easily tap into.
the population base here in Jackson, Wyoming, I want to say that we're close to about 10,000 in the town of Jackson.
Yeah.
But the town is just a small part of, a bigger component of the valley, right? So when we refer to Jackson Hole, the whole is the valley. In Teton County as a whole, I would say we're probably close to 25 to 30,000, residents. And that number will swell much bigger in the summertime during peak season. So to your point, from a recruiting perspective, it's a challenge, right? I mean, you don't have a large recruiting pool, but another layer that kind of gets thrown on top of that is because it's a resort town, it's very difficult for our workforce to find housing.
Yeah.
Rents are high, difficult to find affordable housing. There's not a lot of development that's out there. So being able to accommodate your associates is important. One of the things that we did at that Spring Hill, that I give many props to PEG Companies and PEG Development, who was our ownership group at the time, was that they took it upon themselves to go above and beyond and actually add additional housing or more housing than is required within the hotel, right? So as a hotel, we have to provide housing to a certain percentage of our employees, or there's a housing mitigation fee that has to be paid to the town. But we ended up building a 6-bedroom, 2.5 bath dorm, and then 3 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartments, all within the hotel, right? So we could have housed up to, I think, 35, close to 40% of our workforce at any given time, right? And that housing was really dedicated to our year-round employees. And there was a couple rooms and beds that were open to be able to accommodate seasonal employees. But we find that a lot of the seasonal employees will have multiple jobs and would have, would be able to find housing in other areas with roommates. campgrounds. They would just get very creative. So
Yeah. But again, it's interesting you say that, because I had a company that owns campsites and runs campsites, and they would work a lot with seasonal workers to like run the campsites, like the managers for that, and they would lose the staff for 1 year. They might like a lot of their staff would be transient, like annually, like they would go to a different national park the following year, so they don't have like that kind of consistency of like knowledge in every sort of location as they sort of grow out. And so, like, I wonder, like, because we were alluding to retention and you were talking about the importance of it, that a byproduct of the difficulty of acquisition of good labor is the red hot importance of a retention strategy. Because if you can't really find them, you got to keep the ones you have and better make sure that they're good.
That's
They're
right.
training.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
Obviously we're kind of we're out the back door of, like, I guess, COVID now. You know what I mean? That kind of conversation is it's obviously over now. But the memory of it exists, and the norms and the habits that were developed during that time are now being codified into like sort of like overarching strategy for lots of organizations. When you think about like sort of the retention sort of programs and strategies that you're doing to kind of keep the staff that you have, is a lot of that informed post-COVID in terms of attitudes, or is there always a program to try and keep a lot of the staff? Or how do you think, like, pre and post-COVID, the conversation or the thought about the kind of frontline workers kind of changed in terms of like retention?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always had a retention plan. I mean, it's important to be able to retain your employees because we all know that there's a significant cost in turnover, right? But I think what the pandemic really did was put a hyper focus on the retention strategies that people have to implement. It also required us to go back in and evaluate wages. That was a really big thing, especially, hospitality in general many years ago had the stigma that it was a very low paying industry, right? And hourly workers were making minimum wage, but there was also great opportunities for gratuities and all that. Coming out of the pandemic, because there were such challenges in recruiting, the first thing that people were doing were evaluating wages, right? So that kind of created what we refer to as the wage war. And everybody was trying to outdo each other because they knew that if I paid somebody $15, it would only take them $15.25 to be able to recruit that same individual, and then I had to go in at $15.50. So you kind of had to look at your wages not just at the moment, but you had to kind of anticipate where they would be in a year or so, right? And go and take that route. So you're not always chasing it. Another thing that we were able to really do is create these incentives on, seasonal bonuses was a big one. Hiring incentives, such as, if you've got a really good employee and they would refer somebody to you, typically you'll find that good employees refer good employees. There would be an incentive for the employee that you have, and there would be an incentive for the employee that they recruit, right? And that would be payable, on a 90-day window, right? On a 90-day rolling window. Ensuring that you've got proper health benefits and 401ks or retirement and all that stuff was extremely important. Especially coming out of the pandemic, people were looking to have proper health insurance, right? In the event that they, were getting sick. The nice thing as well with representing a number of large brands is that you have the ability to offer great travel incentives, right? Now that's something that would be applicable to anybody that is working at a Hilton, Hyatt, Marriott, or IHG branded hotel, but making sure that they're aware of that, right? And talking about the incentives that the brands can provide is a great tool because, as many of us in this industry that we have come to love, we certainly love to travel as well.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, obviously you're blessed that you get to live in Jackson Hole full time, or in Jackson rather, versus me in a concrete jungle today. It's different strokes for different folks. What I would say, interesting, when you talk about like the benefits and like they existed beforehand, which is great because like I feel like the conversation is accelerated now where, the battle for talent, no matter where you are, is just so intense. And, like I feel like there's like a reaction to it, like especially post COVID, that a lot of frontline staff realized that they were frontline during COVID and realized that like, you know, the opening and closing, the opening and closing, the opening and closing is like no good for one's mental health or for like family
Mhm.
planning and financial planning and all this kind of stuff. And so there is a kind of greater voice for a lot of the sort of the frontline employees. But like, you know, going back to like the sort of GM, it's like, you know, identifying what makes somebody great in the first place is like something that I find like people struggle to kind of describe, or not
Mhm.
struggle. Everyone has a different take on what makes somebody great in hospitality. And I'm curious, you know, when you think about like, you know, empowering your GMs and looking for sort of like frontline, you know, a lot of times, you know, the top of funnel, so to speak, of like candidates can be
Mhm.
overwhelming. And with like, say, you know, employees coming in, like what are sort of the heuristics? I mean, if that's not too bougie a word to say, or like what are the sort of intangible things that you need your GMs to like look for? Because like I always feel like, you know, service can be taught. You know what I mean? Like say like people, you can show people how to like use a POS or, you know, a booking system, or like, you know, how to turn on the lights at a certain time, you know, but can you
Mhm.
like get them to smile, like proactively pick up that trash in the floor in the corner out of the corner of their eye? Like what are the things that you empower the GMs like to like look for beyond simply service that they can teach?
Yeah, I mean, from a business perspective, I think a GM that can be very analytical is extremely important because they have to be able to review trends and identify, you know, patterns, whether they be coming from service scores or profitability or revenue, and being able to pivot and make those changes on a daily basis. Because you know our guest rooms are a perishable item. The room that you have today, you can't sell it tomorrow, right? It goes,
Yeah,
it's gone, right? So you have to be able to look ahead and identify opportunities and establish rate strategies, and implementing cost saving initiatives if we're falling short. And
yeah,
you know, so being very analytical is extremely important, and the ability to dissect and interpret data,
yeah.
is what I find these days makes a good GM a great GM.
Interesting, you know, and sorry, that's very like interesting. But like when you talk about data and analytics, like the expectation that the GM has to be more now, you
One
know,
hundred percent.
and so how often do you find GMs that are like that?
You know, through
Are they more likely to exist now than they were like 10 years ago? Um,
No, I wouldn't say that they're more likely, but I would say that, you know, you've got the ability to, you know, to train a lot of those skills as well, right?
yeah,
Some are a little bit more able to adapt to it pretty quickly. Others might take a little bit more time to understand and comprehend strategies and concepts, but through time, it's certainly a trainable skill. And with more, you know, involvement, you know, the more you do it, the better you get at it, right?
yeah,
So making sure that we've got touch points, you know, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, you know, whether that be working with different departments or just them doing it on themselves. um, you know, it's a skill that is not just taught, but it's also one that it can be ingrained in somebody, right? Because it could just be,
yeah.
you know, wired
And,
differently than somebody else, right? You know, but
like,
finding that person that has the full package of being able to be very hospitable and understanding how to manage people, and also understanding how to run the business side of things. um, you know, it can be a challenge finding that right person, but when you find that person, um, you know who they are, and as an operator, you do what you can to make sure that you know, to operate with them and train them and keep and maintain
yeah.
them, right?
I mean, has the role changed significantly? Say, like, is it, you know, when you talk about like pivotal positions in the team, it was
Mm-hmm.
always the most pivotal, like it was always the quarterback position. But it sounds like, you know, the expectation of the GM has like kind of grown substantially, like in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
what is expected of them. Like, you know, not only do you have to have like a world class personality to even do the job in the first place, you know, that like there's an expectation of data analytics, or there's an expectation of like running a P&L, like all these kinds of things. It's almost like that the GM has become a type of like vaulted Swiss Army knife nearly.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I like to refer to the GM as the CEO of their hotel, right?
Mm.
And they wear many hats.
Yeah.
Especially in some of our properties that are more on the limited service or focus service type of brands. The GM is HR, is accounting, right? Is housekeeping, is food and beverage, is sales, is all of that, because they have to be able to understand and operate in all those individual silos and kind of bring it all together and lead their team to success, right? And driving performance.
Yeah. And like, I guess, like, where do you see the role of the GM over the next couple of years? Like, where do you see it like evolving to?
Oh, it's always going to be, there's always going to, how do I say this? Because it's going to evolve, but it's going to stay the same to an extent, because at the end of the day, it's all about the people, right?
Yeah.
And managing the people, whether they be your internal or your external customer, that component will never change, right? I think the part that will certainly change and we have to adapt with is when it comes to, new technology and new business intelligence databases and platforms that we can utilize to be able to make better decisions. So from that side, things will change and becoming a little bit more understanding as to external factors that are impacting our operations, and what's happening out there. And, there's a lot of different things out there that impact our world. And as we saw back in 2020, can derail our industry pretty darn quickly.
Yeah.
So it's, what did we learn from that experience? And how do we implement measures to protect us from getting back into that world again, are going to be extremely important.
What were like notable learnings that you had from like sort of the COVID chaos in terms of like how you run a hotel today?
I think the biggest thing that we learned was how important it is to pivot on a dime, right? And to be able to change how we operate very quickly, and balancing the needs of our guests and the employees and our ownership groups, because everybody's looking for some kind of return, right? Whether it be a quality experience, like your work environment, or profitability, there's always a return that somebody's looking for, and really understanding, each component and how your decision making can impact each one of those. So being able to pivot and make adjustments on the fly was something that I think that we all learned. And quite frankly, I think we learned to become better operators, right? Because we had to do a lot more with a lot less.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, just like what impacts like almost like a meteorite on hospitality, almost like specifically. And I always think like, it's one of those ones I look back on that like, your frontline staff are like the unheralded sort of like champions of the time that was there. You know what I mean? Like people were in hotels, they were working, people were in restaurants, people were like front service with no idea what tomorrow would bring in terms of like what the job would entail. And it's almost like looking back, like I definitely feel like it's an extraordinary population of people that will be celebrated at some time. Like there will be a grander acknowledgement of the entire experience.
Absolutely.
Like people like me at home. I wasn't in like an Amazon factory. I wasn't in a hotel. I wasn't in a restaurant. I was Uber Eats in my food. You know what I mean? Like it was a totally different experience, and I think like we can almost be like guilty of forgetting that,
100%. I mean, it's remarkable how all of the employees across every hotel around the world, how resilient they were, because while they were at the hotels taking care of those guests during those difficult times with a smile on their face, they still themselves had the same challenges at home, right? So they had to be able to kind of put that aside to take care of the folks that were in front of them. And then at the end of the day, go back and take care of what they had at home. So, I would say that hospitality workers are very resilient, and go above and beyond, and are looking to put a smile on everybody's face as often as they possibly can.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, it's like, and it sounds like you're running an amazing operation over there as well. So I guess one of the questions I always kind of wind kind of these episodes down is a super vague question. So if you'd listened to any of the podcasts, you'd have heard this. But but like I always ask people, it's like, like what advice would you give somebody listening to this? And that is it.
What advice would I give somebody to listen to this? Well, I would say that the advice I would give would be anytime that you're interacting with an associate from a hotel, um, to be patient, right? And understanding, and that they're doing the best that they possibly can to deliver the best experience that they can deliver. Um, and to kind of take that into consideration. These days, um, everybody can be really tightly wound up,
Yeah.
and so it's just like we all just need to relax, right? And take things day by day and appreciate the things that we've got, and not necessarily focus or worry about the things that we may not.
All right, that's awesome. Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. Fantastic chat.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.